Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays. Pleasure to be with you. I've got Pastor Gary with me. He's on the other side of the state, pretty close to Kansas. Now, you live in
I'm not
Elizabeth,
closer to
beautiful
Kansas
place.
than Wyoming.
We'll see, I know. But it's always a pleasure to do the Way Wednesdays with you, brother. So,
Likewise.
yeah, this is wonderful. Hey, we're in Numbers chapter 8. Now, Gary, some people are asking, wait a second, aren't you guys in the wrong parasha? So could you explain what we're doing?
Absolutely, yeah. And this was confusing even to me, if you can believe that. Yeah, like it doesn't take much to confuse me. But we've been following the Lamb uh, uh, reading portion list since the beginning of the year. And we had been following the Torah reading portion list from First Fruits of Zion up until the beginning of this year, right around the time of Sukkot, when we started the Torah reading cycle again. And that was because it was pointed out to me, and I thought it was a great idea, that Mani Judah, who heads up Lion and Lamb, actually took a little bit of time to make sure that had some association or some link with what was in the Torah and a half Torah portion. As most of you know, the Torah and a half Torah portions are already linked with some kind of a common theme. And so Mani Judah took the extra step to link the New Covenant portions with that. And First Fruits of Zion just kind of cycles through the Gospels, which is not a bad thing. But we decided to take a different approach. Well, that has been working fine up until this last week, where the rest of the Jewish world focused the portion of the week on Shavuot. And Mani Judah said, "Oh no, we're going to go through with Nahshon, which was the regular portion for the week, so it didn't account for the holiday." So we covered Nahshon last week, and we talked about Shavuot during the Way Wednesdays, but we're just continuing to march along with the Torah portions according to the Torah portion schedule on the Lion Lamb website, which I will be getting on our website pretty soon. So you can just simply click on thewaycongregation.com and follow the Torah portion readings along with us.
Very cool.
Long explanation for
yeah, awesome. Well, I say, you got there though. You finally got there. So why don't we just jump in to our Parashat Shavua, all right, our weekly portion. I wanted to focus on chapter 10. That's okay with you, brother. I thought we could,
Hey,
of you who were on, pardon?
I think that's fabulous. We touched on that a little bit following your message last Shabbat.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right. So, in fact, I will be teaching on the gathering of God's people this coming Shabbat. And of course, there's going to be a trumpet blast, right? Jesus is going to blow the trumpet, or he's going to have a kind of a trumpeting kind of voice. And it seems like this is a good place to do it. There's also some great stuff in Numbers chapter 12. It's hard to get through everything. We just can't do it in the time that we have. So that means we probably better get going. So let's jump in. If you guys are with us, let's get going. And again, we are taking your questions. So please put your questions in the chat and we will do our best to get to those. So, Numbers chapter 10. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. You shall make them of hammered work. You shall use them for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps. When they blow both of them, all the congregation shall gather before you at the door of the tabernacle. But if they blow only one, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel, shall gather to you. When you sound the advance, the camps that lie on the east side shall then begin their journey. When you sound the advance the second time, then the camps that lie on the south side shall begin their journey, and they shall sound the call for them to begin their journeys. And when the assembly is to be gathered together, you shall blow, but not sound the advance. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall blow the trumpets, and these shall be to you as an ordinance forever throughout your generations. When you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, and you will be remembered before the Lord your God, and you will be saved from your enemies. Also, in the day of your gladness, in your appointed feast, at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial before you before your God. I am the Lord your God. Now it came to pass on the 20th day in the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel set out from the wilderness of Sinai on their journeys. Then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they started out for the first time according to the command of the Lord by the hand of Moses. The standard of the camp of the children of Judah set out first according to their armies. Over their army was Nahshon, the son of Amminadab. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Issachar was Nethanel, the son of Zuar. And over the army of the tribe of the children of Zebulun was Eliab, the son of Helon. Then the tabernacle was taken down, and the sons of Gershon and the sons of Merari set out carrying the tabernacle. And the standard of the camp of Reuben set out according to their armies. Over their army was Elizur, the son of Shedeur. Over the army of the tribe of the children of Simeon was Shelumiel, the son of Zuri Shaddai. And over the army of the tribe of the children of Gad was Eliasaph, the son of Deuel, etc. I'm going to kind of skip through some of those because I think we have a repeating theme. I hope I'm correct there. Thus was the order of march of the children of Israel according to their armies when they began their journey. Now Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well. For the Lord has promised good things to Israel. And he said to him, I will not go, but I will depart to my own land and to my relatives. So Moses said, please do not leave, inasmuch as you know how we are to camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes. And it shall be, if you go with us indeed, it shall be that whatever good the Lord will do to us, the same we will do to you. So they departed from the mountain of the Lord on a journey of 3 days, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them for 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was above them by day when they went out from the camp. And so it was, whenever the ark set out, that Moses said, rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you. And when it rested, he said, return, O Lord, to the many thousands of Israel. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to take a breather, Gary. Man, there's some great stuff in there, isn't there? I can see you're just like, you're ready to get going there. Yeah.
Well, I especially love that last passage because it's the verse that we say when we bring the Torah out and parade it on Shabbat, and it's just this powerful sense that you have, that the Lord goes forth before you, and the word of the Lord from, I mean, it's just, I get goosebumps. But the other thing that gets looking again, and I really see some pieces of that in here.
Yeah. Brother Gary, I'm sorry, but it's a little bit hard to hear. You're kind of breaking up a bit. That is unfortunate. The joys of the internet.
Oh, no.
Brother Ed says, now that I'm a big time celebrity internet evangelist, I should get better internet. I think it's Gary's this time, but I don't know. It does seem to be the Netflix hour, so it's hard to say. But yeah, I mean, the amazing things in this passage. I mean, when we take a look at this, what is going on there in this text is pretty exciting stuff. I mean, certainly God is going to blow the trumpet. I mean, we have these beautiful passages in Joel chapter 2 there in Joel. Let me get to Joel. There, Joel, that is. I don't know what I got. But in Joel chapter 2, he says, blow the trumpet, sound an alarm in my holy mountain, right? So that's exactly what God said that they were to do, was to sound the alarm when they took off. So they're to sound the when they went to war. So the day of war, right? There's clearly a time of war. So it kind of begs the question: when Jesus has this voice, this trumpeting kind of voice, is it a trump to call his people to gather to him, or is it a voice to proclaim this war march, or could it be both? I'm of the persuasion that it could be both, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other, because we clearly see him gathering his people together at his second coming, by the way. He doesn't gather people in a secret rapture 7 years beforehand. Man, I used to believe that. I believed it with all my heart. I thought it was the way, the truth, and the life. I thought the pre-trib rapture doctrine was the thing. And I was so convinced. But as I continued to examine it, to test, to see if it was true, to be a Berean on that doctrine, I came to the conclusion that I could not defend it from Scripture. And that really broke my heart, because I loved the pre-trib rapture doctrine. And if it were true, I'd gladly keep it, because it's really awesome. But I can't find it in Scripture. I can't find a verse that proves that. But I find all kinds of other verses that tell me that when Jesus comes back, that he will gather his people at that moment. Now, again, is it a little bit this way, a little bit that way? I don't know. I don't know it down to the minute. But I know that at the second coming is when he gathers his people. See, I think part of it is we get this assumption that when Jesus comes back, that he snaps his finger and everything is over, right? Like, okay, Jesus is here, party's over. I don't think that's the case at all. I think when he comes back, that's when the enemy says, okay, we got to double down, because now the leader of that army has just showed up, and we're not going down without a fight. This whole idea that Satan's like, oh, I know I lost, I'm just going to try to take a few people with me. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think he thinks he's on a sinking ship. He's fighting to win, and he is not going to end until Jesus makes him end. And what we see in Scripture, so many places, that all these nations are coming against Jerusalem, that Jesus is going to get into this battle. He's going to get blood on his garments. Gary, I was at a conference some years ago, and I was teaching about kind of this graphic portrayal of what the second coming is going to be like, and how Jesus is going to squash the grapes, and he gets blood on his garments, and this was a pre-trib thing too. It was kind of weird, but one of the guys was like, "Oh, I don't believe in this Marvel version of Jesus' second coming that you have," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know why not. I mean, Isaiah 63." It's pretty clear. Jesus says that he gets blood on his garments. He says in Revelation he's going to stomp on the grapes. I mean, we see this motif all over the place. And he even says, why are your garments red? He says, because I crushed the enemies all by myself. I was trotting the winepress alone. Nobody was with me. And that's why his garments splattered. So I take it to be, well, I don't know why he couldn't get his garments splattered. I'm sure he has a good cleaner. He can take care of it, right? But when he's gonna call out with this voice that is gonna have this trumpeting quality. I want to share a passage so we can take a look at some of these trumpeting ideas. So here's in Joel chapter 2, blow the trumpet in Zion. We have in Matthew 24, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation, these various things happen. And it says, he will send out his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, right? So when Jesus talks, when he is speaking, we have that trumpeting quality. In Revelation chapter 1, there, John is in the spirit, right? And he hears this one behind him, and he says, let's see here if I can find it. It's right in front of me. Let's see. Then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me. All right, I'm missing it. I get it. Don't you hate that? It's right in front of me. Here it is. Okay. I was in the spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a voice as of a trumpet. All right. So that is the trumpeting quality of Jesus' voice. Now, if we cruise over to Exodus chapter 19, we're going to see the same thing. I'll just kind of put that in my little thing here. It's like verse 15 or something. So when God comes down on the mountain, he comes down, and it says, then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain. The sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Again, this voice of a trumpet. Now, just so people understand, the word voice in both Hebrew and Greek can be sound or a voice. Like you and I have a voice, we talk, right? So it can be the sound of a trumpet or it can be the voice of a trumpet, either way. But it's saying that Jesus and or God's voice has trumpeting qualities about it. And I mean, I just think that's really cool. And so these trumpets seem to be, the silver trumpets seem to be the earthly representation of God's amazing voice.
I think I think it's really interesting to be able to hear the voice of God in these trumpets and how we are going to be able to do that. And it likens me to the conversation we had last week about Shavuot and Acts chapter 2. It says that the disciples spoke, but it doesn't say they spoke in tongues. It says that the people heard them in their own language. So we don't know what the voice sounded like, but the people heard it. Is that going to be what it's like when we hear those trumpets, and we will be able to discern what is being said through the rushing water, through the trumpets of God, through His voice, that we will be tuned in to that sound and somehow know it's like, oh, that is my Lord calling me. It's time to rally. Going back to your earlier question, is it a call to war, or is it come up here? I think it is both. A call to battle. So you can't have one without the other. You can't go to war unless you gather together. Otherwise, you'll be defeated. Right? We have strength in our unity. We need to be gathered together. We need to be unified. We need to come together. Anybody that served in the military knows that the first thing you do when you go into war is you amass the troops before you go out on the battlefield. Otherwise, it's like chickens, right? You have to have a strategy. You have to have a plan. This whole everything you've been talking about through the book of Revelation is laying out this strategy, how we get our mindset, how we understand how we're going to attack the enemy, how we're going to fall in order under the commander. I'd like this earlier aspect of Numbers chapter 10, where it really is talking about assembly in an orderly assembly, bringing people together by tribes in certain aspects, numbering them, mustering them, making sure that everybody's accounted for, all hands on deck, ready to go to battle. And that is an essential part of coming together for any war. So for believers, right, we're spread all around the world, and we come from all different denominations and sects and things. But if we hear the Lord, He will call us, and we will know when to assemble. We have to know His voice, so we have to know how we are to come together
Mm,
and hear his orders. He will give us marching orders. When we say, oh,
mm.
I don't know what to do. Well, there are definitely things that we can be doing today. But I think it's going to be a whole different battle when that day comes.
Well said. We got a question from Jay Jones. Um, she says, "Doesn't Satan likewise have a set of powerful pipes that he might try to fool us with?" Well, I think the idea that Satan has pipes is coming from Ezekiel chapter 28. And I'll just take us there so we can take a look at that text. But I think that was probably a mistranslation on the part of the King James. All right, so this is the New King James, by the way. And it says, "So your workmanship, the workmanship of your timbrels and pipes, was prepared for you on the day you were created." All right. So I grew up with the King James. I still like to use the New King James. So I'm very familiar with this, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and probably get shot by somebody. But I believe that that is not the best translation. It's not the best translation. So this you have tupecha and nechvecha. This word nekev is these two words. I'm gonna put it in a different translation because I think the NET does a really good job with this. So yeah, your settings and mounts, your settings and mounts. So really, if you have all these stones, what would be the next logical thing? Well, you need something to put these stones in. And that is really a better translation of these. The word nekbecha, which is from nekiva, which is for uh, feminine, right? So something that's feminine versus masculine. All right, so you already have something that's indented versus something that's outdented. Okay, that something is protruding versus something that is indented. So I'm not convinced anymore. I used to be, but I used to think that, yeah, Satan must be the choir leader up in heaven because he's got these pipes, But I don't think that's the case anymore. Now, I'm not going to say that he can't sing. Chances are he probably could sing. We know that the angels are singing in heaven. We know that when they came to the birth of Jesus, that they were putting on a pretty good concert. So I would presume that Satan can indeed sing, but we're not specifically told that in Scripture. It's an inference from other passages. But I don't think Ezekiel chapter 28 really proves that point. So I think it's important because we don't want to think that, well, I'm going to be deceived, when Jesus is coming back, and then, maybe I'm hearing the wrong voice. I kind of get the sense, Gary, that if we're in tune with God, when we hear His voice, we're going to recognize that frequency. If we're not in tune with God, if we're kind of tuned into Satan, as it were, then when we hear something, when we hear God's voice, it may not register. Or if Satan should give out some kind of a call, then that will be the one that kind of registers. Kind of like when you're tuning in, there I am, old fashioned, right? when you're tuning your radio, not just hitting the presets, right? But you gotta go and find that next station. Back in the old days, there was this thing called static between them, and you had to then tune into the right frequency. And I suspect that could be something, but again, I'm just speculating here. So yeah, thank you.
That just begs the question: is how do you get tuned in? How do you know that you're tuning in? How do you know that you're going to be hearing the voice of the Lord? And again, that's you don't want to be deceived. Nobody wants to be deceived. I remember Jeannie telling me, my wife, she's a nurse, telling me all the time when she was in nursing school, it's like, how am I gonna know all these diseases? How can I possibly understand what all these different things are? And the same kind of thing is held true for counterfeit bills. There's so many different ways to counterfeit a bill. So the idea is to know what normal is really well, know the
Yeah.
source, know the truth, know it inside and out. And all of a sudden, the abnormal really stands out. And then you can go to begin research that. So in a given illness, it's like, something's not right. Your eyes are red, or your temp's high, or you got a cough, or whatever. It's like, what's causing that? Or you look at a bill and it's like, that line is not supposed to be there. Let me sort that out. The way we know is
Right.
by going to the Word, and they're consistently going back to the source language is so important. And it's time consuming. It takes a lot of study and things like that. But if it seems on the surface, it's like, oh, I don't quite get it. Try going to the source. Use the tools available to you, and things like that. And someday we'll all be Hebrew scholars like Doug, and that'll be much easier. And we'll be able to say, well, no, wait a minute, that's in the feminine. I should have known that. It's like,
And I hope you surpass me. That would be great. Well, speaking of the text, let's go back to the text, because I think the question of how to not be deceived is in the text, right? So you make these two silver trumpets, and what are they for? Calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps, right? So there's congregating, right? That is so important, is that we practice this, so we know these trumpets, we know the sound of these. When we do finally get that war cry, we're not like, oh my goodness, what is that all about? But we've been practicing this. We've heard that call to come. Now, as part of our tradition at the Way congregation, we blow the shofar every week. And I don't know if that's what God's voice is going to really literally hear, if it'll sound like that or not. But still, we're kind of we're going through the motion. And I'm not saying that if you don't blow a shofar, then you're a bad person. I don't believe that at all. But for me, it's an object lesson. It's an object lesson that it reminds me that, yes, our King is going to call us. He's calling us to gather, and then he may be calling us out to war. But first, you want to practice getting together, and then, like you said, you have to first gather before you can go out to war. So if we come together, and at the Way congregation, what do we do every week consistently? We go through the Word, right? That's what it is about. It's the Word of God. What does the text say? It's not how flashy that I or any pastor can give a message. Is what does God actually say about this particular topic? And that's why I love going through the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book, because then I know that I'm not skipping stuff, right? I'm going through the text and really digging as deep as I can dig to say, this is what the text says. This is what God said about this topic. And I believe if we'll do that, it'll keep us grounded so that when we hear God's voice, well, we recognize it because we're like, I already know his voice. I've been reading, his voice, not talking about what it sounds like literally in your ear, some kind of a loud noise, but right, I'm sure that's going to overwhelm all of us. But there'll be something familiar about it, something very familiar about hearing that voice. You'll be like, wait, I know that voice, right? I didn't know it sounded like that in this environment, but I've heard this. I've heard those words before. I've heard the intonation of what God is saying. I've heard these things because we practiced gathering. So gathering is super important. Now, right now, we're all stuck at our homes, and so we're kind of doing the internet thing. And for those of you who are part of our e-community, we're delighted that you're with us. But we also want to encourage people. If you're in the Denver area, come join us. And should we make our big announcement now, Gary?
Drum roll. Go for it.
Okay.
This one's all you.
Yes. So June 13th, that is not this Shabbat, but the following, we're getting together in person. You're all invited to come to the Way congregation. And I can hardly wait. I think it's going to be fantastic. We've finally gotten through most of this coronavirus stuff, and I'll tell you, we've had many different discussions, Gary, you and I and others, about, okay, what do we do? Do we practice civil disobedience? Do we just say whatever? And, I think the conclusion that you and I have come to is, there may be a day to fight. There may be a day to stand up and say, okay, this isn't right. But we want to make sure we kind of keep our ammo for the right fight and not just any fight. There's a time to fight and there's a time to not fight according to Scripture. So that's the big question. Is this really the time to fight? And we've been asking this for the last couple months. And I think the unanimous decision we came to is no, it's not the time to fight. We don't have all the facts. We don't know all of the particulars about this. So anyway, we're excited that we can now gather again, and starting June 13th, come join us at the Way Congregation in Lakewood. So that'll be pretty cool.
As you're talking about that, Doug, we really need to be in a state where we are fully prepared for the big battle. As you were talking about the kind of the gathering, the assembling, and things like that, it brought back my PTSD from my days in the Navy, where we would constantly drill, be out to sea, and we would constantly drill multiple times a week, and you would hear different alarms that would call you to some station or some reporting area, and from there you would open up the book and find out what the procedure is. As you're talking about, we blow the shofar at the beginning of our services. Right now, many of us, we just think of that as, oh, service is going to start. As we are entering into these last days, let's shift our mindset to say, oh, I'm gathering together for a purpose. It's not like, oh, it's time to put down the coffee. It's time to, I can grab another donut before I get it. I think we need to be preparing ourselves to say, oh, okay, I'm going to arm myself. Oh, okay, maybe I didn't have my full armor on. Maybe I need to get ready for battle. I need to assemble. I hear an alarm. It's for a special purpose. Maybe it's for praise. It's like, okay, it's time, man. I'm coming with everything I've got, and I'm going to do it correctly, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And that's it. Sort of harkens back to those days in the military where you were expected to not only respond, to be on station, but to know what to do. But you always had that source, that procedure. That, to us, that's the Bible. So, okay, what is God telling me to do here?
Right.
And I really think that that last day, it is going to be that audible thing. In the meantime, we store this up in our hearts, so we memorize it, because maybe we don't have access to it, and it's and we have to trust what we know or what's in front of us. I remember what my father-in-law told me. He was a pilot, and he had just gotten his qualification for flying by instruments, and knowing to trust your instruments, that they're going to get you back on the ground when the fog is around you. I mean, we are going to be entering into a time with a fog of war, with the distractions, where all this and evil is surrounding us, and we have to be able to operate in that kind of a venue to be able to know in our hearts what we are supposed to do. And we don't know that if we're going into our study time, our worship, half-heartedly, lackadaisically, without an intent. And I just feel impressed to share that with people tonight, that there is a purpose to us. And as we regather, I think it's time for us to really take our gathering seriously. But that seriously doesn't mean that it's not joyously. Doesn't mean that it's not with exuberation. Doesn't mean that, that there's fellowship, that we're all, standing there at attention with our bayonets and all this stuff. No, but with our mindset and knowing that we're going to be called upon in these last days to do the work of God as He goes forth. All right, and our enemies will be scattered, and those that hate us will flee from before us. Knowing that's like flying by your instruments. It's knowing that God has it handled, and we can do this. But we need to have it in our hearts and in our minds that we can do it, and we need to know it like the back of our hands.
Yep, man, that's a great word. I was just thinking, about what you're saying with your wife Jeannie and her medical training and stuff. An ER doctor, when he's there and they bring in a patient, he doesn't like, okay, well, wait a second, let me get out my manual and kind of check this thing, right? The guy's dead by the time he looks it up, right? He's got to know what the procedure is. He's got to know what the procedure is, if it's, and I don't know all the terms, okay? So all I can think of is triage. That's the fanciest medical word I know. But, he's got to say something stat, right? And he's got to know these terms. He's got to know them. He's got to know what they mean. He has to know how to apply them. And like you said, like the back of his hand. And so the whole thing about these trumpets is that this is a weekly practice. This is the drill, right? And like you said, it can be fun. It can be awesome. It can be, with great joy. That's part of the drill, in fact, is finding the joy of the Lord in that time. It's not a time where, okay, we'll close our eyes and hold our hands and don't breathe for 2 minutes. That's not what God is calling us to. It's a wonderful time of joy and so much excitement. Man, that's awesome. That is awesome. Hey, why don't we continue on in the passage here? So let me take us back to our text. And I think we are in Numbers 11. So I have to be honest, I'm hoping to get to 12 because I think there's some really cool nuggets in there. So let's do it. But there's some great stuff in 11 as well. All right. Now, when the elders complained, it displeased the Lord, for the Lord heard it, and his anger was aroused. So the fire of the Lord burned among the camp, consumed some in the outskirts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses. And when Moses prayed to the Lord, the fire was quenched. So they called the name of the place Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had burned among them. Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving. Oh, that's interesting. The mixed multitude, right? We know these guys that came out of Egypt. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its color like the color of bdellium. I'm going to just go back to you here, full screen. Then the people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, and beat it in the mortar, cooked it in pans, and made cakes of it, and its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. And when the dew fell on the camp in the night, the manna fell on it. Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, everyone at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was greatly aroused. Moses also was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you afflicted your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have laid the burden of all these people on me?" Did I conceive of these people? Did I beget them? That you should say to me, "Carry them in your bosom, as a guardian carries a nursing child to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all to all these people? For they weep." Now, weep here is like they're crying, they're complaining, right? They're not just sad crying, but they're complaining crying. If you're a parent, you know the difference in your kids' cries. For they weep all over me, saying, "Give us meat that we may eat." I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me. If you treat me like this, please kill me here and now, if I found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. Oh, right. You got to love it. Who said you can't talk frankly to God, right? So the Lord said to Moses, "Gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them. Bring them to the tabernacle of meeting, that they may stand there with you. Then I will come down and talk with you there. I will take of the spirit that is upon you and will put the same upon them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone. Then you shall say to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. Because you've despised the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever come out of Egypt? And Moses said, the people who I am among are 600,000 men on foot, yet you have said, I will give them meat that they may eat for a whole month. Shall flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to provide enough for them? Or shall all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to provide enough for them? And the Lord said to Moses, has the Lord's arm been shortened? Now you shall see whether what I say will happen to you or not. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and he gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tabernacle. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took of the spirit that was upon him, and placed the same upon the 70 elders. And it happened, when the spirit rested upon them, that they prophesied, although they never did so again. But 2 men who had remained in the camp, the name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the spirit rested upon them. Now they were among those listed, but who had not gone out to the tabernacle, yet they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. So Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, one of his choice men, answered and said, Moses, my Lord, forbid them. Then Moses said to him, are you zealous for my sake? Oh, that the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his spirit upon them. And Moses returned to the camp, both he and the elders of Israel. Now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and left them fluttering near the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and about a day's journey on the other side, all about the camp, and about 2 cubits above the surface of the ground. And the people stayed up all that night, all that day, all night, and all the next day, and gathered the quail. He who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So he called the name of the place Kivrot Hatava, because there they buried the people who had yielded to craving. From Kivrot Hatava, the people moved to Hazerot and camped at Hazerot. All right, and there's a lot of stuff in there. Where to start, right? Where to start?
Yeah, and so I think a logical place to start is kind of desiring things other than what the Lord has given you. I mean, the Lord was so gracious to give manna.
Yep.
And it came out of nowhere. It was food from heaven, and it was sufficient for. Had apparently multiple flavors or multiple ways of fixing it, or different ways of eating it. It was fresh every day. You didn't have to go far. It's not like you had to go to the market. It's not like you had to figure out what was going to be for dinner that day.
Right. It's kind of like Hello Fresh, right at your outside your tent, right? I mean, you just had to go and collect the stuff. I mean, that's I mean, talk about, front door delivery service. That's pretty amazing.
But I think there's also an aspect too of kind of craving what your old life was like. Only I could go back to the good old days, right?
Yep. Yep.
I remember I used to go out and enjoy this or enjoy that, or I wasn't convicted about this action like I am now. It's like, first of all, that conviction that you're feeling is a good feeling. It indicates a change in your life for the better.
Right.
And the evil one, he'll come back and tempt you with those types of things. But it's so the initial message is seeking the goodness that God has given you, at the same time craving things from your old life. That's kind of what stands out to me.
Yeah, and I mean the whole thing starts by the people complained, right? They were complaining. And I'll tell you, if you're a parent, you probably have had your kids complain once in a while. And I'm always of the sense that, don't complain to me, come talk to me. Chances are I might actually give you what you're asking for. But if you're going to complain and whine about it, you're already turning me off, right? I don't want to talk to you. I don't want that. And so what we see is this gradual thing, not gradual, just continual thing of where the people continue to gripe and complain. I mean, first there they are when Moses comes to town. What did you come here for? You made our lives really awful, right? Then he takes them out to the Red Sea, and they're like, "Why did you bring us out here? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt?" Right? So they're giving it to him again. Then they go through the Red Sea. He parts the thing. You got fish swimming next to you as you're walking through the Red Sea, and then destroys Pharaoh and his army. And then they're like, oh, there's no water, right? And so then they complain at the waters of Meribah, and blah 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 blah. And God's like, hey, Moses, just go strike the rock, and you know. And then they're like, there's nothing to eat. Why did you bring us out here? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? And then he's like, okay, what do I do now, God? He's like, okay, I'll bring down bread from heaven, right? So every time they asked for something, well, every time they complained about something, God provided in a miraculous way. And so now they're complaining again. We're not actually told specifically what they're complaining about at the top of chapter 11. It's just that they complained. And the fire of God, it says that it burned among them, right? So they have this it's burning them, and it killed some of them. It burned among them, and that was not a good thing. Some people died as a result of that. And I think it's good for us to remember God is fire. So God was hanging out in their midst. And remember, at this point, there was not an Ark of the Covenant. There was, correct me if I'm wrong there, but maybe there was. I'm trying to think now. Hold on. There was. Okay, thank you. Yes. But God had, well, when they first came out of Egypt, I'm kind of getting my wires crossed, but when they first came out of Egypt, God was not hiding himself. He was not containing himself in something. He was just kind of out there in the open, right? And then it was after the golden calf incident that then God went outside the camp and they set up the tent of meeting. But that wasn't initially how it was going to be. I think he did that to protect everybody, because it's like, you guys are getting so close and you're really starting to annoy me, and you are going against what I keep telling you. My holiness, my incredible power is just going to, just flash out. And I think that's what happened at the beginning of chapter 11. Well, so then, as you were saying, that then they have this intense craving, and they're like, who will give us meat, right? And yeah, they're looking back at the old life. We want to go back to Egypt, right? I mean, how many times do they say to him, let's go back to Egypt? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Why did we come out here? And at one point, they're even like, they're about ready to stone Moses and Aaron. They're like, we're going back. We're going back. And it's like, wait, you guys were slaves in Egypt. You were slaves in Egypt. Now, it's interesting that it says the mixed multitude. So it was people that did not have the promise of redemption, but they saw something good in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were smart enough to say, you know what? I think their God is better than the Egyptian gods. And so they tagged on to Israel. But clearly, some of them were not fully in it. Their hearts were not there. Their hearts were still in the old world, right? So they were among the group, but they were not truly in their heart with the group, right? They were with them physically. Their feet were there. Their hands were there. But their heart was still back in the old life. And don't we find that, Gary, that some people come to the Lord, or whatever term you want to use, they're in church because somehow it was beneficial at the time. Somehow, coming to Jesus was something that kind of healed a wound, but they never really repented. And it's not just this group or that group. Any one of us, I think, has that potential. And I think Satan can use these various things in our past to kind of dangle them in front of us. Say, remember how delicious this was, right? And you're like, remember this sin? Wasn't this a really good one? You're like, yeah, that was really good, And chances are it probably was tasty. I mean, onions and leeks and all garlic, that's delicious, right? So it's not that those things had no flavor, shall we say, but it's that in the circumstance that the people were in, they were in slavery, right? So they were in slavery, and that's what people were forgetting, is that they were slaves. They were slaves. God took them out, and now they're free, and they're free to ask God for anything, anything, right? And yet all they do is complain and bicker because what's in their heart? Egypt is still in their heart. Slavery, the slave mentality is still in their heart. This victim that, poor us, poor me, I don't have enough. It's always so hard. Everyone's against me. Why don't, wham, 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 right? And so it's just babies, right? They're crying. It says they're crying. And God's like, you know, I'm tired of it. And then Moses gets tired of it, right? I mean, it's crazy what is going on in this text. And
And I think it's fair to an extent to not underscore the what was facing them. They're
yeah,
in the wilderness.
yeah,
Right?
right.
Egypt was a pretty good place, probably even for a slave. You get contraband goodies or whatever, but for the mixed multitude that was part of Egypt, that was probably a good life. They had
Mm,
melons and leeks, but I think it also represented kind of a lifestyle that
mm,
went along with it. Not a lifestyle of a slave that's not so great, but compared to the bleak wilderness, and that's
mm,
oftentimes what we're faced with. Is
yeah.
like things look kind of bleak for
Hmm.
these last 2 months. Things have looked for us kind of bleak. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, really, is this the extent of our worship? Is to see a guy over the a video stream? It's like, and it's easy to complain about that, and it's easy to whine about that.
Hmm.
And you and I have both heard plenty of it, and you and I have done both plenty of it. Uh,
Yes, we have.
and, and so it really is easy when you're in dire circumstances to really have this sense that God is surrounding you and He has your best interests at stake, because sometimes what He has put you in doesn't necessarily feel that well.
Mm,
And it's not in my best interest. I don't think it's in my best interest.
right,
Um, and,
right.
and so,
Yeah.
hey, I'm,
Well, and,
I'm
and
going to
being in the
complain.
wilderness is so amazing because, we see this term, the wilderness, again and again, especially in the book of Revelation, right? You have the woman that goes into the wilderness where there's a place prepared for her,
We're going back.
right? And of course, it was in the wilderness where they got married. It was in the wilderness where they complained and things got ugly. It was in the wilderness that all this stuff happens. And then God says in Hosea chapter 2, he says, I will betroth you again to me in righteousness, and says, and I will allure her in the wilderness, right? So the wilderness is still part of our experience. In fact, it's a very important part of our experience, because I think what we're confronted with is that I can be a free man in the wilderness, and I don't have nearly what I had when I was a slave, back in Egypt. I was a slave in Egypt. I had no rights, but I still had a fair amount of the comforts of this life. But in the
The roof over
wilderness,
your
I'm
head.
a free
Yeah.
man. Yeah, I'm a
Right.
free man, but I don't have anything, except God. And that's the test. God's like, you know what? I want you to see that I am sufficient, and I want you to learn to depend on me, to talk to me, to
Yes.
walk with me, to have that relationship with me. And that's really what it took. I mean, I always go back to the Karate Kid. I just, you gotta paint on the original, of course, right? Paint on, paint off, right? Wax on, wax off, right? Why am I doing this, Mr. Miyagi? You're learning karate, right? So as he's painting on and painting off, he's learning skills, he's learning strength every time he does that. And it doesn't make sense until later. And I think that's the same thing when we're in the wilderness. yeah, we're going to complain. This is so hard. This is not fair. And I've just seen the I've seen the progression in my own life, Gary, where I would excuse me, kind of find myself in the wilderness, and I would complain, and I'd be like, "Oh God, I'm gonna die. Why did you leave me out here? Wasn't it good before?" And of course, then I would come through it, and I'd be like, "Oh God, you're so awesome!" Right? And so, then I don't know, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, I had a situation, um, and I was like, "Oh no, right? I'm gonna die," and that old sense of this is the time to panic came back. And I'm like, because that's what I did, something happened. This is the time to panic. It's supposed to kind of have that worried, crazy, frantic prayer. Like I just got to throw everything at God and just hope that He has a bit of mercy and is nice to me or something. And so that tendency was right there. And I'm like, no, wait, no. I've seen that God has always been faithful. I'm not going to panic right now. I'm not going to fear. And I can't say that I've had a perfect record since then, but I really did learn something. I learned that He's faithful and that I don't need to panic, right? And what I started to do instead is to start thanking Him for the wilderness experience, whatever that may be, whatever it looks like for you or for somebody else. We're all going to have these different kinds of experiences, but instead of panicking and saying, "Oh Lord, help me, don't let me die," rather it's just to have that calm, collected assurance that, I'm in the boat. There's an incredible storm going on. There's waves all around. There's wind. It's dark. It's scary. Jesus is in the boat. And if Jesus is in the boat, I've got nothing to fear. It doesn't matter what waves come and hit me. He's in the boat, right? And it made such a huge difference at that point.
It is. It is. I think there's a thing, a wilderness mindset that, and maybe it comes with seasons as we mature in our walk. It's no coincidence that the children of Israel spent 40 years in the wilderness. They had to really be tested and hardened to be able to go in and conquer the land and fulfill their mission there. And even then, they had difficulty and were successful to an extent. But there is this mindset that you learn as you go, kind of experience life, I guess. That says, okay, I'm in a wilderness moment, recognizing that it's a wilderness moment, and then finding that reliance on God, knowing, trusting that He will bring you through, and that there is something to learn there. And I think seeking that and asking, okay, God, this is not going the way I had in mind, but you have me here for a reason.
Right.
So what can I take away from this? So I can get out of here quicker. Because I really want to learn it fast so I can get out of
here. Yeah. But yeah, learning to be thankful for the wilderness, because thankful, not that it's easy, thankful not because you love just sweating and getting burned and being parched. No, we're not thanking for those things. We're thanking Him that in this desert experience, God is teaching us lessons that we really couldn't learn except by going through the wilderness, right? And look, I'm not one like, put me in the wilderness, Lord, I can hardly wait. No, not at all. Are you kidding? I'm like, I'm happy to not be in the wilderness, but I've also learned to just relax, just chill out. So, Ed Doss had an interesting comment. He says, striking difference between Numbers 11, Moses' complaints, and John 17, the people you gave me. So that's kind of interesting, right? In John chapter 17, Jesus is praying for these disciples that you gave me. And at one point, Jesus had 70 disciples, right? And then He seems to have those, but then there's an inner circle of 12, and then a innermost circle of 3. So we kind of see these concentric circles that kind of go out from there. But it's interesting that God, Moses is like, okay, I can't take it. I need help. And so God's like, okay, I'll take some of the spirit that's on you and I'll put it on all these other guys, which is cool because it's not like there's only, a certain amount of spirit, right? It's like, man, this stuff is like sourdough bread, man. I can just, it never ends. I can just keep making more of this, right? The Holy Spirit, God's Spirit, um, it multiplies. It's not like it's divided, but it multiplies. And so now you've got 70 people that have the Holy Spirit instead of just Moses. That is a blessing. And I appreciate Moses. He's not trying to hoard the power for himself. His servant Joshua is concerned. Oh no, right? Stop him from doing what you're supposed to be doing here, Moses. And he's like, I wish everybody would do this, right? That's great. And I think that's such a good lesson for especially for church leaders, for anybody who is a Christian leader, teacher, whatever, because there's that sense of, well, I've got to hold on to this because, man, if people don't hear the message from me, they might hear from somebody else, and if that happens, they may not like me anymore, and then they're gonna go and hang out with other people, and it's like, you know what? God bless them. Like, just be free. May God pour out his spirit on everybody. May he equip people with the teaching of the word, and that everybody would be able to just take the message that God is giving and be led by the Holy Spirit. That would be fantastic. The world would be a better place, right?
Yeah, and I think that is an early aspect in the history of Israel, in the transformation of the children of Israel from their first years in the wilderness to the time that they actually enter into the land. Much like the disciples, the transformation. So the John 17 comes at the end of Yeshua's ministry, after his disciples have gotten to an extent where it's like Yeshua feels pretty good that these guys are now equipped to go and carry on their mission. Much like I think Joshua felt that they were equipped as they stood on the banks of the Jordan River getting ready to enter into the Holy Land. It's like early on, it was a little rocky and a little dicey, and there's a lot of complaining and things going on. That maturing process, that discipleship process that occurs, this key thing that Moses did and God did through Moses to take some of his spirit and spread it among is so important that the more we do that, the more others are built up, that the more we begin to give thanks as we see God working in his people. And no longer do we have to complain about the people that he gave us, but we can rejoice in them.
That's right. Yeah. So well said. Well, at the latter part of the chapter where God's like, you want quail? You want quail? I'll give you meat. It's going to come out not just one day, 2, 5, 10, 20, but a whole month. It's going to come out your noses, right? You're going to be sick of this stuff. I think of the little kid that gets caught smoking, and then the father's like, you want to smoke? You want to smoke? All right, smoke the whole pack, and here's another one, and don't come out until they're all done, And then the kid comes out green, and he's like, oh, right, I'm never going to smoke again, Dad, right? So, the punishment seems a bit harsh here, right? Because all the people wanted was meat, right? Can't God just give them meat? Of course he can give them meat, but not when they're complaining about it. That's the thing. God is not a genie. He's not a robot or something like that where you can just order him around and complain about it. He's looking for a relationship, and he's more than happy to give. That's the thing. He loves to give, right? Jesus tells us that our Father in heaven is great. He says, which of you, being evil, would give your son a stone if he asked for a bread, or which of you would give him a serpent or a scorpion if he asked for a fish, right? How much more then will your Father in heaven give you good things to those who ask, but not to those who complain? It's a huge difference. Like, oh Lord, why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that? I can't believe you're letting this happen, God. Like that's the kind of of just this murmuring and this bickering and this, little just this kind of stuff that eats you up. And God has emotions. It eats him up too. He's like, I can't stand that. Stop it. Ask me. Ask of me, and I will give. Remember when after David committed adultery with Bathsheba, he says, you know what? I would have given you more if you just asked, right? I gave you all this, and I would have given you more if you just asked me. But of course, David didn't. And that is what God is requesting from us. Just ask me. Don't complain. Because really, I thought about this some years ago. I'm like, okay, what's up with complaining, right? Like, what is wrong with that? And what I realized, I was going through the Ten Commandments, and I realized that it's actually coveting. Complaining is coveting. Because when I complain, what I'm really saying is, why does so and so get to have that and I don't? Right? And so then I become jealous. I covet my neighbor's stuff. But what am I really saying? What I'm really saying is, God, you're not sufficient. I don't believe that you really are God. Because if you were, if I believed that, I would believe that you would meet my needs in a perfect way. But I really don't believe that. That's why I'm complaining. That's why I'm whining and mumbling about all this, blah, 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 blah. You're so lousy. You're not doing this and that. And what I was doing is I was taking God from up here as the king and putting him down here and saying, you're not worthy. You're not good. And it is really one of the worst forms of blasphemy. It's slander when you really think about it, because what they were doing and what I have done in my life is I'm taking God's character and saying, God, you're not good enough. You're not really God. And I'm putting other gods before me. That's what I was doing. And it was shocking. I was just like, oh my, after I kind of came out of this little meditation time, I'm like, this is not cool. This is not good. I've got to stop complaining. And since then, I've made it a habit to just thank God. Doesn't mean everything is perfect in my life, right? But when I have a thankful heart instead of a bickering heart, it really changes my whole attitude. To pray without ceasing, in prayer and supplication. Here's the key word: with thanksgiving. That's the word. With thanksgiving. Imagine if the children of Israel, instead of complaining, why don't we have water? Why don't we have manna? Why don't we blah, blah, blah? Right? Instead of that, they could have said, God, thank you for taking us out of slavery. Thank you for killing Pharaoh and his dudes. Lord, thank you for this manna that you give us each and every day. Lord, thank you for the water that you give us. Thank you for the meat. Lord, could we ask for some new recipes? Okay. Is there a new way to prepare manna? Or if they just come with a thankful heart instead of this griping, complaining heart, can you imagine what kind of difference that could have made? I mean, I think it could have been huge.
Absolutely. Thankfulness is one of those things that transforms your mindset, and it changes the focus from you,
Mm-hmm.
right, to the blesser, to the one
Mm-hmm.
who's the source of all the blessings, to God, and knowing and trusting. So it builds your faith, it builds your trust in God. It what's the word I'm looking for? Just my mind went
Changes your
completely blank.
focus, right? It changes your
Yes,
focus.
yeah, there you go. Thank you. So it's so important to be able to come to God with the kind of the right mindset,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
and thank Him and trust Him and know that He is faithful. That
Yep. Yep. I think that's where
He
the
will.
children of Israel went wrong, is they had the wrong mindset. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yep.
They did not. They kept relying on themselves, and
Yep.
400 years of being a slave, where you're at the hands of your taskmasters all the time, for everything that comes to you. It's a severe case of PTSD. I don't know.
But you have to just wonder, you have to just speculate. What kind of conversations were they having when they were not being watched by the Egyptians? If we could be free, we would you know,
Oh yeah. It's
if
like
only
those
we
kind of
can,
like the
yeah,
lottery conversations, right?
right,
It's like,
right,
we won the lottery. Yeah.
right.
Uh,
Or this is the guy who works at the factory or at the whatever, the mill or something, and he's like, well,
yeah.
if I could be the boss, then this is what I would do, right? And so then God's like, okay, here you go, right? And then suddenly you're like, I don't know what to do, right? And there's sense
Yeah.
of, you can talk. It's easy to talk, right? Talk is cheap. And so what God is doing is he takes all of us through these situations in life where we have to learn. Sometimes we have to learn to just shut up, because sometimes we talk way too much, we boast, we're arrogant. Again, talk is so cheap. You can say anything. I would do this, I would do that if I were the king for a day. I would be the greatest ever. I would never allow these things to happen. And if I were running the show, but then you get to run the show and suddenly you discover, oh my goodness, there's all these other things I didn't know about. There's all these scenarios that I'm really not prepared to handle. I don't know what to do.
Right.
And so then you either have to rise to the challenge, or you're going to just curl up in that fetal position and just you know let the world pass you
Yeah.
by. um, God didn't say it
The
was
other,
going
the
to be
other
easy.
Yeah, the other thing that speaks to me in considering that is that God manifested His awesome power in so many different ways, in coming out of Egypt through all the plagues, through the slaying of the firstborn, through the pillar of fire that separated them from the Egyptians as they
Mhm.
were had their backs against the sea, and going through the sea, and the experience at Mount Sinai, that they had all this collective experience, yeah, that is like so. We look at that and we say, how could you possibly not trust God, or not know that He's willing and able, and He wants to deliver you, and He will bring you into a better place? But it makes me think too of how many times God acts in our lives that we don't see, or we choose to not ascribe it to God, or we don't see His glory manifest in our life, even through the simple things. So
Mhm.
we need to be able to put on our correct our optics so that we're
Yes.
looking at the way God acts in our lives,
Yep.
even when it seems it's happening in the natural. God is acting all the time in our lives,
I'm in.
and it just
Yeah.
and that produces that thankfulness.
Yep. Yeah. And sometimes the thankfulness will then produce more thankfulness, right? So yeah,
Yes,
changing the optic.
absolutely.
Yeah, it
Yes.
becomes kind of self-fulfilling in a way. So I'll tell you guys, if you haven't practiced giving thanks, and I don't mean just when you eat or something like that, but do that too. But just look for any moment, every moment of your day, and there's probably something you could find to complain about. I bet you there is. Okay, but then instead of going on that urge and really expressing that, to say no, I'm not going to say that one this time, and look for something regarding that situation to say, you know what, I can actually thank God for this. Okay, yeah, this over here, yeah, it's not easy, but I'm going to thank Him that X, Y, and Z is good, and just focus
Yeah.
on it. And I tell you, it changes your perspective. It changes your heart. It changes your outlook. It changes your chemistry in your brain. I mean, it changes everything if you'll just practice thankfulness.
And Doug, we're going to be challenged with that as we reopen, and
Mm.
everyone who comes is going to be challenged with that,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
things are going to be different for a while.
Hmm.
There are going to be constraints that we have to deal with. My wife and I went out to Tokyo Joe's for the first time since all this stuff went down,
Hmm.
and you had to go in this way and you had to exit that way,
Hmm.
and you had to stand far apart uh, in front of the guy before you could order.
Hmm.
They didn't have said, "Oh, I'd like a drink. I'll have to get that for you. You can't touch the things. It's no longer self." So there were a lot of things that were
Wow.
radically different, and it
Yeah.
just made me think. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, as we go together,
Yeah.
we're going to be experiencing some of these things. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been limited to 10 in our gathering. Now we're going to be limited to 50 in our gathering.
Hmm.
There are still going to be hardcore constraints. However, we are meeting, we are fellowshipping. There is reason to give thanks. We can
Amen.
look at each other in the eye. We can lift up our voices in unison. We can pray together. We can experience the joy of the Lord, and we
Yeah.
can assemble.
Yep.
And so, is it going to be the same? I venture to say it's going to be better because we're going to relish it.
Amen.
We're going to
Yeah.
desire it more. Yeah,
That's
will
right.
there be some physical things that we've got to deal with? Yeah, but I tell you,
Yep.
those are petty
Mm.
conveniences.
That's
And
true.
as we go into a mindset that says these are petty inconveniences because we get to worship together before the King, it all
Hmm.
goes away.
Amen.
And complaints of like, yeah, you know, no,
Yeah.
let's start changing our minds right now.
That's good. Man, preach it. I love it. Hey, we're in chapter 12. I'm pretty excited about
Yeah,
this.
we made it.
Yeah, I know
Okay,
we
we're gonna
did.
have to
We
do
got
an hour
13
two.
minutes here. I know. Look at us, man. So then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. Then the Lord came down to the pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward. Then he said, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. Wow. Okay. Whew, that's an exciting ending. So,
Wow.
what's going on? We got some slandering going on in this chapter. This is really a big deal, right? So, speaking of envy, speaking of coveting, here you've got specifically it's Miriam. Okay, now it says both Aaron and Miriam, but it would seem that Aaron was kind of the he didn't seem to be very strong in character. That's the impression I get. You know, I
Very,
mean,
yeah, very characteristic of Aaron. Whatever. I'm going
yeah,
along with this one too. I guess.
yeah. He's kind of like, well, we just took some gold, put it in the fire, and out came this golden calf. What? I don't know how to happen, right? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, you know. So here I get the sense that Miriam, the older sister, right? She's like, I can't believe Moses married that Cushite woman, an Ethiopian. Black woman, by the way, kind of interesting. I don't know. Was it a race thing? Was it a color thing? I suspect it wasn't color, but she was different. You know,
Yeah.
this woman that he married, she's different. You know, she doesn't deserve to be one of us. She's not one of us. Whatever she was saying. And then she was saying, hey, what am I? And I've done some prophecy right back at the Red Sea. You know, I got my tambourine, and we girls we started singing and doing stuff. Can he talk through me too? Why is Moses so special? So now she's talking smack about her brother, and God's like, okay, you guys come into my office, right? And they just got called to the principals, right? This is scary. So God's like, hey, if I talk to a prophet, he sees a vision, not with Moses. He sees me. I talk to him face to face. This is pei el pei in Hebrew, mouth to mouth, which is interesting. And then it says that he sees the tmunat Elohim. He sees the form of the Lord. He sees the form of the Lord. And so, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. That's another rabbit trail of, does God have a body? Does he have a form? Yes, he does. We see it again and again. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, 70 elders of Israel, they went up the mountain. They saw under the firmament God's feet, or his feet, upon the firmament, and they ate and they drank and they didn't die. Right? You see that. You see in Ezekiel chapter 1. I saw above the firmament, as it were, the form of a man, because God made us in his image. I mean, there's so many passages that tell us that God's form is a manly form, and that is not surprising because he made man in his image, right? So that's totally cool. But I think that the bigger thing here is that she slandered. She slandered, and what happened to her? She became leprous. She became leprous. And there's a school of thought that suggests that leprosy could be a it could be a punishment or a consequence of slander. So that's kind of interesting. Slander. What is slander? When you talk smack about someone, you talk bad about their character. You're defaming that person. You're lessening their good name. That is to slander. Satan did it. He was the first slanderer. We know that Korah, in a sense, did it, though he didn't become leprous. But another guy that's really interesting is King Uzziah, right? I remember in Isaiah chapter 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, right? And he heard these angels, Kadosh, 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 right? And he says, "Oh man, woe am I, because my eyes have seen the King, and I'm a man of unclean lips." Unclean lips means that you're saying stuff. This is where we have to be so careful, Gary. So careful, right? Because the people that are in leadership, we don't have to like them, right? And I'm not saying that every leader out there, every president, every governor, I'm not saying that they're all handpicked by God, and that you can't, in a democratic society, that we can't have our grievances. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that we need to be careful that we don't just talk smack about people because we don't like this policy or that policy. When it comes to pastors, that we can be so careful that we don't just talk about them because maybe they didn't say the word right, or they didn't do this right, right? And God convicted me of that some years ago. I was kind of going around, as the expert in various things, and I thought it was my duty to correct people. And God had to deal with me. He's like, no, not really. I'm like, man, I'm sorry, Lord. And so you know what? I changed my tune. I really strive. I'm not perfect, but I strive to show great respect to people when I'm having a discussion or debate on Facebook. I try to only talk about the topic and not drag the person's character into that. And I think this is an easy thing for us to do, that we can slander people. Slander is so dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous.
To me, the key verse there is verse 3. The man Moses was very humble. Humility is such a cornerstone of uh, a leader, a good leader. And people oftentimes mistake that for weakness, for meekness, for humility buys you all kinds of grace. And the more we understand that we don't understand it all, the better off we'll be. And to give people an ear to hear their side of the argument, to be able to, mutually respect them, to gently correct, but do it in a way that is not arrogant, does not lord it over people, and be willing to be corrected, and know that we don't know it all. That goes so far. To me, that's the attribute that Moses has, that God points out, that is so important in the lives of every leader. Needs to be able to exercise the humility of, strive to exercise the humility of Moses. I don't think we ever get there.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's beautiful. You get the sense that he wasn't like, giving his credentials all the time. Just like Jesus, right? I mean, here's Jesus. He's God walking around. He's got like, like lightning could come from his hands at any moment, right? But he could have called fire down from heaven as the disciples wanted to do, but he's like, I didn't come to do that. That's not my point, right? So humble, he allowed himself to be put on the cross because he did not come to show off his power. That's not the point. It's almost like, yeah, I've got all this power, but I didn't come here to destroy you guys. That's not what I want to do. I'm trying to love you, right? And so love and humility or meekness, humility and meekness are the same word. It's this sense of you've got strength. It's not that you're weak. You've got great strength, but you're not boastful. You're not arrogant. It's not about showing what you can do. It's about interacting with the other person and helping that person, helping them to rise up. There's so much more in that.
And I think there's the wisdom of knowing when to exercise your power and when to restrain your power. That is huge. And we know that Yeshua will come back, and he will be in the winepress, and he will get blood on his garment, and there will be a time for the battle. But it's a wisdom and knowing when the time is right, and that's part of humility as well.
That's right.
And those are challenges that leaders get faced with all the time. And the good ones exercise that wisdom very judiciously, rather than just bringing out the sword at every opportunity.
That's well said. Here's a question from K9 Centurion Kilo. Question, so if Miriam and company were murmuring against Moses, how does the Lord feel about murmuring against Moses today? That's a great question. So I think what's behind that is there are a fair amount of Christians today that are bad-mouthing Moses, that namely the first 5 books, right? The books of Moses. Maybe not Moses the man, but the things that Moses penned and what we call Moses. He does get kind of slandered a fair amount. So I don't think God's happy with it, quite frankly. What are your thoughts?
I think that any of God's anointed, right? It's like we should just be careful with our words.
Yeah,
we really do need to know that our tongues are sharp, and we open our mouth way too quick, and we need to be very circumspect and thoughtful about the words that come out of our mouth, especially if you're in leadership. Because people's lives hinge on this. Their salvation hinges on it. The way that they interact with other people, as we disciple people, as people become disciples, and they go out and they share the word, that they share the gospel of Yeshua. Your words can take somebody away from Jesus, from Yeshua. You can turn them away from Christianity. You can turn them away from salvation based upon how you interact with them. Wow. And your actions, your words, your deeds. And that's a heavy responsibility. And so murmuring, period, needs to, I think you just need to be really careful about that.
Yeah, just don't say it. So, well, we're out of time. We got through 3 chapters. That's pretty decent. We skipped 8 and 9, but so again, guys, just so you know, we're following the schedule that is found online at Lamb Ministries. So if you want to check that out, we're going to have our own copy on our website one of these days. So if you're kind of wondering why this Torah portion is different than what other people are doing, we're going through the same Torah. Just I think the weeks got off a little bit, and that's the decision we made.
They'll probably true up at some point in time. I don't know. I haven't looked through the entire year, which is kind of how we got in this situation right now. But we'll be good. We're not. The important thing is we're not skipping anything. We're actually ahead of ourselves. So
See, look at us.
we're in good shape.
That's cool.
And then
Awesome.
I think the other thing is to keep an eye on the website. Keep an eye on the newsletter. If you're not getting the newsletter, send us your email address or put your email address in the chat. We'll add you to the newsletter because you'll be seeing things about our reopening. Like we
Yeah.
said, things are not going to be quite the same. They'll be different. But this will give you an idea of what different is, and that will help you kind of prepare mentally for what you're going to be walking into, so that you can come with everything, every essence that you have, that you can praise before the
Yeah.
King, that you can worship before Him, and that you can study His Word.
Yep.
It'll be great. It'll be great to get back together.
June 13th. Put it on your calendar. All right. God bless everyone.
Cool.
Take care.